Okay, so one of the biggest talking points I would say, probably since the invention of the atom bomb, but especially in like the last 5 or so years, is the dangers around nuclear weapons and the mass destruction it could cause. And that was recently always the main focus points in just almost all sorts of safety and security type talks, at least up until recently, with now AI being the central focus point. You know, what happens when AI exceeds human intelligence and human capabilities? What are we going to do? How are we going to operate? How are we going to keep ourselves safe? Yada, 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 yada. So I want to talk about something that I find quite interesting. And this is the whole concept of, I'm not sure there will ever be a large-scale World War III situation. And when I say large-scale, I mean where multiple nations are themselves involved, like America, Russia, China, EU countries, maybe Australia, Japan, etc. I think a world war is going to look completely different, and I would argue that we are currently in a world war. And this started with the Cold War. Now, I came across an interesting book while researching this this topic, and it's a book called The New Frontier of War by William Kittner. To summarize this book and the idea, Kittner's main point is that the Cold War had expanded warfare into a political struggle where propaganda, covert influence, pressure, and indirect action could be as important as armies and weapons. The book frames this as a new kind of frontier where states compete through lens visibility, but highly strategic means. So, for example, this book emphasizes political warfare as a central tool of state power, not just side activity. The importance of ideology, persuasion, and internal destabilization in international conflict. The idea that communism strategy, especially Soviet strategy, used a broad political maneuvering rather than only military force. The need for Western governments to understand and respond to these tactics with equal seriousness. So, this book is a Cold War era argument that real battlefields, including propaganda, covert influence, and political pressure, making war much broader than traditional military fighting. Now, what happened during the Cold War? The Cold War was between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was between 1947 and 1991. Fairly long period. It was not a direct war. Instead, it was a battle of ideas, technology, and power. The US supported democracy. The Soviet Union supported communism. So what was the cause? The US and Soviet Union were allies in World War II, but they did not trust each other. I think we should by now know no one should trust the US. The Soviets wanted control of Eastern Europe for safety, while the US wanted to stop the spread of communism. So the two sides, the world split into two groups. The US and Western allies formed NATO to protect each other. The Soviet and its allies formed the Warsaw Pact. So proxy wars, both sides never fought directly. Instead, they fought in smaller wars in other countries. For example, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. The arms race and space race, as you know, both sides compete to build the most dangerous weapons, including nuclear bombs. They also compete in space, who would be the first people to space and who would be the first country to put someone on the moon. The end in 1980s, the Soviet economy struggled. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev made new reforms. This led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. In 1991, the Soviet Union broke apart in 15 independent countries, officially ending the Cold War. Now, I have a thought on that. Whilst Russia is a severely weakened economy now, they still have a decently strong military because they have large stockpiles and they have their own tech that they build, call it in-house. Like, they don't rely on outside arms coming into Russia. They kind of do through China, but basically they build their own tech. And I would argue that the Cold War never really ended. It's still Now it looks like it's more between China and the US, but Russia and China are allies. And now there's a very real AI race between China and America. And, who can build the best technology, who can build the best military equipment, etc. But the reason why I thought it's interesting to bring this up is because I think the fundamentals of war have changed. And we see this through Russia. I mean, they did directly attack Ukraine. However, Russia and China have their proxies through Iran and multiple other nations. And the US and Western allies, despite them not really liking Israel, have a proxy through Israel. And it seems like the Middle East is almost the central proxy between these nations competing for the most power and most economic resources, which makes sense because the Middle East is full of oil. But I think the nature of, like I said, war has completely changed. I mean, it's very costly today. I mean, the Ukraine-Russia war has cost Russia an estimated 550 billion to 2.5 trillion in total military spending, economic damage, etc. And in Ukraine, it's caused physical infrastructure damage alone on nearly 600 billion, which combined cost of war disruption, recovery, and project to exceed $1 trillion. So this is what it's cost just for the war between them. Now, good, it has been a 5-year war, so it's not like it cost nearly $3 trillion just in 5 days, Like it took a while. But it's still very expensive. And for what? For a little spot in Crimea. I know Russia technically thinks the entire Ukraine belongs to them. But their central focus point has always been Crimea. And I know Crimea is a strategic point, but is it really worth $2.5 trillion? No, not really. Like, there's no way in any world they're going to make up what they lost in this war. It just was too expensive. Now, if we look at the Iran and the US war, it cost roughly a total of, so the global economy impact was $2.2 trillion just because of the Strait of Hormuz, the stock markets plummeting, etc., etc. The overall cost to the US just for the month war that they were in was 29 billion. And it's projected that it could be upwards of 300 billion now with rehabilitation costs, etc. The damage to Iran's economy was 270 billion. So yes, that's a fair number. But 27 billion in a month, that's crazy. That's absolutely insane. And if we look at the US's military annual military budget, it's now pushing. Trump just proposed a $1.5 trillion budget, which is insane. And this leads to a problem where you're asking, how can they have such a big budget but accomplish virtually nothing? Like, what did they accomplish with Iran? They did economic damage. That's it's obvious, but they didn't take control of the Strait of Hormuz, so they weren't calling the shots. And at the end of the day, they spent a buttload of money on nothing. So you have to ask, what is this $1.5 trillion? Where does it come to? Now, the way expenditure works in the US is the budget is announced, 1.5 or whatever, let's say for last year was $1 trillion. And then these companies, the defense companies, they basically bid for the highest contract. They win the contract, and then manufacturing costs, blah, blah, blah. They basically send the bill to the US, to the United States Defense Department. The problem with this is because this budget is so high, these defense contractors can basically price their stuff at whatever they want, far above the normal price for a technology like this. That is why we see, for example, the Russian technology costs a fraction. Now, good, Russian technology has been pretty shit lately, but it costs a fraction of what it does to buy the same US technology. And yes, US technology, again, is a lot better, but it shouldn't be 5 or 10 times the price. So it's a very big issue in the US. And again, proves my point that war is too expensive. Now, if we factor in nuclear war to this whole scenario, let's say companies, they're at that point, everyone just decides to start firing missiles, etc. What do you guys think the economic damage from that is going to be? It's going to be it'll be impossible to recover from that. So the cost of war is it's too high. It's way too high, and therefore I think we will never really see a world war. We will see world war through proxies, through propaganda, through causing internal conflict in countries, etc. And you see that a lot through propaganda. I mean, the West is trying to push their propaganda, the East is trying to push their propaganda, the Middle is trying to push their propaganda. And that's why I think the Cold War has never really ended, because it's exactly the same blueprint, just different technology and different methods of actually getting there. So yeah, I think we're in for very interesting times ahead in terms of war. Look, I wish the human race could be in peace and coexist together, but I just don't think it's human nature. I don't think it's part of nature and part of biology. I think there's a reason there's always been wars and never ever been a period of global peace. But interesting, one point that I want to bring up quickly, which was interesting, Ukraine has now produced they have mass produced a new kind of low cost interceptor drones, which cost between $1,000 to $2,000 each. And these tiny drones, they can use against people, against enemy soldiers. And an enemy soldier typically costs between $10,000 to $30,000 per soldier if you factor in the training, the equipment they carry, etc. And this is why I'm saying war has become too expensive on a large scale, but proxy wars are kind of the new frontier through cheap technology, etc. So I know it kind of sounds like I'm contradicting myself because Ukraine just came out with a cheap drone. But the larger things on larger scales, etc., it still costs way too much to wage war. So I think it's a good thing that it's heading to this. That if there has to be war, it should rather be through proxies and propaganda and internal conflict instead of large-scale world wars, which cause a lot more destruction, especially now with nuclear being the main factor. So yeah, that's for today. I know it was a bit all over the show. Like I always say in previous videos, I'm still trying to figure this whole thing out, so please do be patient. But yeah, let me know if you guys have an opinion. I'd love to hear it. This is just my view. We'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.